I can tell you it's not so far-fetched to change your allegiance to a new team.
At 70 years old, Kevin Costner reached a point most Hollywood legends never truly arrive at, a moment where there was nothing left to prove, no image to protect, no career move left to calculate. And in that rare space of clarity, he finally decided to speak the truth. Not about fame, not about awards, but about respect, legacy, and one man whose influence quietly shaped everything he became, Rob Reiner. This wasn't a promotional interview. There were no sound bites crafted for headlines. Costner's words came slowly, deliberately, carrying the weight of decades spent inside an industry that builds stars fast and discards them even faster. And what made this moment different was timing. Age has a way of stripping away fear. At 70, Costner no longer worried about saying the right thing. He cared about saying the honest thing. But to understand why his words about Rob Reiner matter so much, you have to understand where Kevin Costner truly came from. His story didn't begin on a red carpet. It didn't begin in casting offices or studio lots. It began far from Hollywood's glare, in a working-class household where discipline wasn't optional and humility was expected. Born Kevin Michael Costner on January 18, 1955, in Linwood, California, he grew up grounded, not glamorized. His father, William Costner, worked long hours first as an electrician and later as an executive for Southern California Edison. His mother, Sharon Ray, stayed home, quietly nurturing her son's love for music and performance without ever pushing him toward fantasy. Life was stable, not flashy, and that balance left a permanent mark. Frequent family moves across California forced young Kevin to adapt quickly. New schools, new faces, no guarantees. Each move taught him resilience, self-reliance, and a quiet toughness that would later define the characters audiences trusted on the screen. Even then, Costner learned something many actors never do. You don't demand attention. You earn it. By the time he reached college, acting wasn't even the plan. He attended California State University, Fullerton, earning a degree in marketing and finance. Hollywood felt distant, unreal, something that happened to other people, until fate intervened in the most unexpected way. On a flight home from England, Costner found himself sitting next to legendary actor Richard Burton, a chance encounter that would quietly change the trajectory of his life. Burton didn't offer promises. He didn't sugarcoat the struggle. He simply encouraged Costner to take acting seriously if he was willing to endure the cost. That conversation planted a seed that refused to die. And once it took hold, Kevin Costner committed fully. No shortcuts, no safety nets, acting classes, endless auditions, rejection after rejection. Early Hollywood didn't welcome him, it tested him. His first major film role in The Big Chill was cut entirely from the final movie, a brutal moment that could have ended everything before it began. But Costner didn't quit. Instead, he learned to endure. He doubled down, he sharpened his focus, and as slowly, painfully, his moment began to arrive. This foundation, built on discipline rather than ego, is what makes his words today carry so much weight. And it's also why his reflection on Rob Reiner cuts deeper than praise. It's a reckoning with what actually lasts in Hollywood. Because what Costner realized at 70 is this: careers don't survive on noise, they survive on trust. And that lesson begins with Rob Reiner. By the mid-1980s, Kevin Costner was no longer invisible. He didn't explode onto the screen with noise or bravado. He arrived quietly. And that quiet confidence caught people off guard. His early breakthrough came through films like Silverado and No Way Out, where his restraint stood out in an era obsessed with volume. While others pushed harder, Costner pulled back. He let stillness do the work, and audiences noticed. That restraint reached its turning point when The Untouchables launched him into the mainstream as Elliot Ness. He didn't play the role like a superhero. He played it like a man burdened by responsibility, calm, controlled, moral, unshakable. Hollywood took notice. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Costner became the face of something rare, trust. Then came Bull Durham and Field of Dreams, baseball movies on the surface, but something far deeper underneath. These weren't stories about winning, they were stories about belief, regret, reconciliation, and the quiet hope that it's never too late to make things right. Field of Dreams didn't just succeed, it embedded itself into American culture. A film people returned to not for spectacle, but for comfort, for meaning. Costner understood something early that many stars missed. Audiences don't fall in love with perfection. They fall in love with vulnerability delivered with a strength. That understanding pushed him toward his biggest risk. In 1990, he stepped behind the camera to direct Dances with Wolves. It wasn't a safe move. Westerns were considered dead. Studios were skeptical. Critics were ready to pounce. But Costner believed in the story, not because it would win awards, but because it mattered. He respected history. He respected silence. He respected perspective. The result stunned Hollywood. 7 Academy Awards, Best Picture, Best Director, and a message that echoed loudly. Kevin Costner wasn't just a movie star. He was a storyteller with discipline and vision, someone willing to protect the integrity of a story, even when it put his own reputation on the line. Throughout the 1990s, he continued choosing passion over safety. Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, JFK, The Bodyguard. Some were massive successes, others were polarizing, but the pattern never changed. Costner stayed loyal to what he believed a story should be. Honest, human, grounded. That loyalty came at a cost. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, box office disappointments tested his standing in Hollywood. The industry moved faster, louder, younger, and many assumed his moment had passed. But Costner never disappeared. Films like 13 Days in Open Range slowly rebuilt respect, not through hype, but through consistency. And that's where the deeper lesson began to form. Survival in Hollywood isn't about dominance, it's about durability. Years later, when Costner returned in a way no one expected, as John Dutton in Yellowstone, it wasn't the comeback driven by reinvention. It was driven by alignment, the same quiet authority, the same moral weight, the same controlled presence, only now sharpened by age, loss, and experience. At this stage of his life, Costner could finally look back with clarity, and that clarity led him to recognize something crucial. The people who leave the deepest mark aren't the loudest. They're the ones who create space, who protect a story, who protect people. That realization is what brings his reflection back to Rob Reiner. Because long before Costner had the words to explain it, Reiner embodied it. By the time Kevin Costner reached 70, he wasn't speaking like a man trying to impress anyone. He was speaking like someone finally free from the need to polish his memories, free from the pressure to sound diplomatic. And that's exactly why, when he started talking about Rob Reiner, it didn't feel like casual praise. It felt like a confession. Costner admitted that age changes what you value. When you're young, You're obsessed with proving yourself. You chase applause, you chase momentum, you chase the next role that keeps you relevant. But later, when the noise fades, you start seeing the truth clearly. The people who mattered most weren't the ones who dominated the room. They were the ones who made the room feel steady. And in Costner's eyes, Rob Reiner was the definition of that steadiness. He described Reiner as one of the rare filmmakers who knew how to balance heart and intelligence without ever insulting the audience. According to Costner, Reiner never talked down to viewers, and he never underestimated them either. His films were emotional but structured, human but disciplined, warm but never sloppy. Costner made it clear that this combination is rarer than most people realize, because in Hollywood, a lot of directors have vision, but not everyone knows how to guide people toward that vision without crushing their spirit. And that's the line Costner kept coming back to. He said Reiner had a reputation on set that stood out in an industry fueled by ego and chaos, not because he demanded respect, but because he earned it through consistency, through preparation, through fairness, through calm authority that never needed to raise its voice. Then Costner delivered the sentence that explained everything. He said, Reiner came in prepared every single day, and that preparation mattered, because when a director is prepared, everyone feels safe, safe enough to take risks, safe enough to experiment, safe enough to fail without being humiliated, safe enough to bring their best ideas forward without fear of being shut down. Costner explained that Reiner created a space where actors could breathe, where they could try something bold and not worry that it would be used against them. And he emphasized one detail that might sound small to outsiders, but in Hollywood, it's everything. Reiner listened. Costner didn't frame it like a dramatic revelation. He said it plainly, almost like he was still surprised by how rare it is. In an industry where voices get drowned out, being listened to changes everything. It builds trust fast, and trust is the currency that keeps careers alive. That's why Costner's praise didn't sound like nostalgia. It sounded like gratitude, the kind of gratitude that only comes when you've survived enough years to recognize what actually protected you along the way. Because Rob Reiner wasn't just making films. He was shaping an environment where decency wasn't weakness and preparation wasn't control, it was protection. Costner then tied this into a bigger truth about Hollywood survival. Careers don't last because of a noise. They last because of trust. And according to Costner, Reiner earned that trust the hard way. Not through hype, not through image, but through clarity. People knew who Rob was the second he walked into a room. No mixed signals, no hidden agenda, no ego games, just consistency. And when Costner said that, it carried an unspoken implication. He had seen the opposite too. He had seen directors who weren't prepared, directors who used fear as a tool, directors who crushed people for a sport. And once you've lived through that, you never forget the ones who did it differently. That's why at 70, Costner finally understood Reiner in a way he couldn't when he was younger. Because real greatness isn't loud, it's steady. As Kevin Costner continued reflecting, his tone shifted. It wasn't admiration anymore, it was understanding. The kind that only comes after watching dozens of careers rise fast and disappear just as quickly. Hollywood, he explained, doesn't destroy people overnight. It wears them down slowly. Ego, fear, insecurity, poor leadership, unspoken power games. Most careers don't fail because of talent. They fail because the environment around them becomes toxic. And it's where Rob Reiner stood apart. Costner said that Reiner's approach revealed a brutal truth about longevity in the industry. Careers don't survive because of noise. They survive because of trust. When trust disappears, everything collapses. Performances become guarded. Creativity shrinks. Fear replaces curiosity. According to Costner, Reiner understood this instinctively. He didn't need to intimidate people to control a set. He didn't rely on chaos to assert authority. His power came from clarity. People knew exactly where they stood with him. There were no mixed signals, no hidden tests, no shifting rules depending on the mood of the day. That kind of consistency, Costner said, is rare, and rare things last. He explained that Reiner earned loyalty not through charm, but through decency. Crew members trusted him, actors trusted him, writers trusted him. And once trust is established, people give you their best work willingly. Costner admitted something quietly profound. When he was younger, he didn't fully recognize the value of that steadiness. Like most young actors, he was focused on momentum, on proving himself, on surviving the next project. But with age, perspective sharpened. He realized that the people who truly impressed him weren't the loud visionaries or the aggressive risk takers. They were the steady ones, the people who showed up the same way every day, calm, prepared, fair. That realization reframed how he viewed success. Reiner didn't chase hype. He didn't jump on the trends. He didn't dominate rooms just to be seen. He trusted story. He trusted character. He trusted timing. And most importantly, he trusted people. That trust created loyalty, and loyalty is what keeps a body of work alive long after trends fade. Costner made it clear that this reflection wasn't about nostalgia. It wasn't about romanticizing the past. It was about identifying out what actually survives in an industry that chews people up fast. He said Reiner's real legacy isn't just the films audiences still rewatch. It's the reputation he built while making them, how he treated people when no one was watching, how he protected the process without protecting his ego. And at this stage of life, Costner admitted that lesson mattered more than box office numbers or awards ever could. Because when the lights go down and the years pass, what you remember isn't the applause, it's how you were treated and who treated you right. That realization hit harder with time, and it led Costner to one final conclusion. Speaking openly about Rob Reiner wasn't just about giving credit, it was about drawing a line between real success and empty flash, which brings everything to the question of legacy. By the time Kevin Costner reached this point in the conversation, it was clear he wasn't looking backward out of nostalgia. He was taking inventory. At 70, you stop measuring life by momentum. You measure it by residue, what's left behind when the lights dim, what people still feel when your name comes up years later. Costner said this is where most people get legacy wrong. Hollywood teaches you to chase moments, opening weekends, headlines, awards, seasons, but moments fade. What stays is how consistently you showed up and how people felt standing next to you when things were hard, not when things were easy. That's where Rob Reiner's example became unmistakable. Costner explained that Reiner proved you didn't have to be flashy to be great. You didn't have to dominate conversations. You didn't have to control through fear. You could build work that lasts simply by respecting a story, respecting people, and respecting the audience enough to trust them. Early on, Reiner trusted audiences to think and feel for themselves. He didn't spoon-feed emotion. He didn't chase trends. He believed that if you treated viewers like adults, they would meet you there. And over time, that respect always came back around. Costner said that lesson only truly lands later in life. When you're younger, success feels loud. It's measured in applause and attention. But later, success becomes quiet. It's measured in who still returns your calls, who still wants to work with you, who speaks your name with respect when you're not in the room. And that's when Costner realized something that hit deeper than any box office number. Longevity will always matter more than momentary fame. He admitted that earlier in his career, he didn't always recognize that. He was busy surviving, busy carrying projects, busy protecting his own momentum. But time has a way of stripping everything down to what actually mattered. Reiner's legacy wasn't built on ego. It was built on trust. It wasn't built on dominance. It was built on consistency. It wasn't built on fear. It was built on decency. And that's why decades later, people still talk about him the same way. Costner made one thing very clear. When you reach a certain age, awards don't comfort you anymore. Headlines don't satisfy you. What stays with you is whether you can look back and say you treated people well while doing the work you loved. That's why speaking up now felt necessary. Not to elevate Rob Reiner, but to clarify the difference between real success and empty flash. Because at 70, Kevin Costner isn't chasing legacy anymore. He's defining it. By the end of Kevin Costner's reflection, you could feel the shift. This was no longer about Rob Reiner alone. It was about what Costner had learned after 4 decades inside a world that rewards illusion, punishes honesty, and rarely offers peace. At 70, Costner said something many stars avoid admitting. He wasn't chasing perfect answers anymore. He was chasing the real ones. Because after success, failure, reinvention, and survival, one truth remains undefeated. Fame never fully loosens its grip. It follows you through the highs, through the lows, through the moments you think you've escaped it. And the older you get, the less you care about being admired, and the more you care about being understood. That's why his words about Rob Reiner landed so hard. Costner wasn't simply praising a director's talent, he was honoring a kind of character that Hollywood rarely celebrates publicly, the kind that doesn't need to be the loudest voice because the work speaks, the kind that doesn't rule with fear because respect creates better results, the kind that doesn't chase trends because timeless storytelling outlives them. And Costner admitted that he understands Reiner better now than he ever could when he was younger. When you're young, you mistake intensity for greatness. You mistake control for leadership. You mistake visibility for importance. But when you've lived long enough, you realize the people who truly shaped you weren't the ones who impressed crowds. They were the ones who treated you right when nobody was watching. That's the line Costner drew. Clear, unforgiving, honest. He said that when the lights go down and the years go by, what you remember isn't the applause, it's the human moments, the respect, the fairness, the feeling of safety that allowed you to do your best work. And that's why, in his eyes, Rob Reiner's legacy won't fade. Not just because of the films, but because of the way he treated people while making them. Costner's reflection wasn't sentimental, it was practical. It was a warning and a lesson wrapped into one. Hollywood will always reward flash, but life rewards what lasts. And for Costner, what lasts isn't fame, it's trust, it's decency, It's the people who helped you keep your dignity while you were building your dream. And now, at 70, Kevin Costner isn't speaking to be quoted. He's speaking so the truth doesn't get lost, because in the end, there's only one legacy that matters, the one people carry in their hearts when your name is mentioned.